Okay, we're live. Welcome to another episode of Turf Chat. I think this is episode 41, Larry.
Yep.
We have a special guest with Jodie Cunningham is going to be our lead in the discussion today about delegating and why it's easier if you do that. I will mention that in the lead up to this, Jodie and I kept dropping and falling off. So if I go away, Larry, that's another good reason for you to be in here in case there's something going on. But the recording is live and it will be posted later on YouTube as well. So with that, I thought I would start by introducing our main guest, and then Larry, you and I can introduce ourselves, and then we'll get started. So Jodie J. Cunningham is the owner and human capital advisor at Optimus Talent Partners, LLC.
Yeah, okay.
She specializes in workforce analytics, which helps organizations get the right people in the right jobs and grow their exceptional talents. She's worked with a variety of organizations and industries, from the hotel business to the Los Angeles Rams, and obviously with Golf Course Superintendents Association. Jodie, I believe you're an annual speaker at the GIS conference.
I am, yes.
And so I'm really excited today to mix it up and have a little bit more on business and leadership and communications as opposed to the traditional agronomic topics. So I look forward to hearing from you. Larry, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Larry Stoll from Pace Turf out in San Diego, California. And we work with John on some of these, and I'm really looking forward to hearing how to delegate because I'm really bad at it.
I have to admit, I've gotten much better at it as I've gotten older and don't feel like I need to control as much, but it's still something that I need to work on, and it's good. So that was Larry. I'm John Kaminsky. I'm a professor at Penn State Turfgrass Science, and kind of trying to bring these back. And so that's what we're doing. We're going to be hosting these as long as we're stuck inside, and hopefully in the future we can continue these even when we get back to normal. So with that, I'm going to go mute. I'm going to tell everybody if you have questions or anything that you want to chat about, do so in the Q&A or in the chat, and I'll monitor that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jodie, and let you take it away.
All right, sounds good. Well, I did shut off my camera because I was kind of you were cutting in and out. So I just wanted to make sure my video wasn't slowing things down. But thanks so much for asking me to be here today. I'm very excited about it. So obviously we're going to talk about delegation today. And I love the line on this slide. It's just easier if I do it. I know that resonates with a lot of you. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to make it easier. But as was just mentioned, I certainly have an affinity for the golf industry and the turf industry because actually my husband is a golf course superintendent or a former golf course superintendent. And so I know that you guys work in the most beautiful environments there are. Certainly the great outdoors. You get to see these beautiful sunsets in or the sunrises in the morning out on the course. It's really just a peaceful time of day to be outside. It's absolutely stunning to be able to work that close with nature. And I know it's something that you really enjoy. And in fact, probably you work before the sun comes up, right? You're trying to do your job by flashlight or by feel in the elements, of course. There's never a shortage of elements that you have to battle with regards to the rain and the snow and hurricanes and mud and all kinds of craziness. And then you also probably have to deal with thousands of species, bugs, critters, worms. There's all kinds of things that you're dealing with that are battling against you in terms of making everything look great. And then, of course, you always have the unexpected irrigation break that you have to deal with, which is always a lot of fun. And then we start to incorporate guests and members into the equation, where you have random things happen on the course that you could probably write a whole book about, or even employees might even make a wrong turn and send a piece of equipment into the pond. So there's probably not a day without some sort of drama. It's probably pretty rare if there is. And then, of course, the never-ending need to remind golfers to fix their ball marks. It's constantly happening. And there's no shortage of things that you have to deal with as managers on a golf course. But there is one thing that we didn't talk about yet, and that is the people side of it. right? The turf side sometimes, I think, and you probably would agree, it's easier to manage the turf, but sometimes it's more difficult to manage the people. And so when we talk about leaders, I think that one of the things I always like to point out as we start to get into this type of topic is that, you know, as the leader, your job isn't to do the work anymore. Your job is to lead the people that do the work. And that's a big change. You know, you think about when you started your career, you were the doer. Right? You had a job, you had tasks to do, first jobs, second jobs, you were out on the course, you became an expert in what you were doing. And you were so good, in fact, that you got promoted, which is awesome. All right. But now, once you get promoted, your job isn't to just do the work, but it's also to lead people who do the work. And I'm guessing that when you got promoted into a management role, nobody taught you how to delegate. You've just had to figure it out. But ultimately, the only way you can be effective is if you figure out how to delegate effectively, right? Because the reason for that is because you don't scale. You're only one person. You can't do it all. And so to be an effective manager and to be an effective leader, you've got to master the multiplier effect. So what do I mean by that? That means, you know, you need to take what you know and multiply it through teaching and guiding and delegating to your staff, because you've got to be able to do that and work with and through your people to be successful. So as was previously mentioned, my name is Jodie Cunningham. I'm the owner of Optimus Talent Partners, and I really work with organizations to help optimize talent. So you are filled with, your organizations are filled with individuals that really do the work, as we were just talking about. And so what I do is I help organizations use data to hire the right people, get the right people in the right jobs, and then also effectively manage and lead those individuals based on how they're wired. I also do a lot of leadership development as well as HR and business consulting. So, but I work a lot in the private club and golf industry, helping individuals such as yourself be more effective in what you're doing. And my background is really kind of probably pretty average. You know, I got an undergraduate degree at Arizona State, degree in communication. And after I graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I moved to a ski resort in Colorado and started working at a front desk at a hotel. And that eventually introduced me to the human resources industry. And so that's actually what I've been doing for 20 plus years, most recently with Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts. And really it was with Four Seasons that I learned, I went through a lot of leadership training and I learned how to become a better manager. And after I left Four Seasons, I actually went into the NFL and I worked for, at the time, the St. Louis Rams. Now they're the Los Angeles Rams. And if you follow football, you're probably very much aware that that's not their current logo, but I haven't actually brought myself to be able to put their current logo up there. I still like the old logo. So with the Rams, though, that's where I learned to coach. I mean, I worked in a building with NFL coaches, and that's all they did morning, noon, and night is coach players on how to be better and get the most out of the talent. And so after I transitioned out of the NFL, I opened Optimus Talent Partners. And now what I do is I teach individuals such as yourself how to really utilize data and understand what drives people, so that you can get the most out of your talent and really achieve your business objectives. So today, we're going to talk about the dreaded delegation word, right? So we're going to talk about what it means to delegate. We're going to talk about why it's important to delegate, because you got to understand the why if you're going to want to do it. And probably I'd argue what is even more important is we're going to find out what happens when you don't delegate effectively. And then of course, I'm going to round it out with some tricks of the trade in terms of effective delegation so that you can get really good at this part of your job, because it's going to be key to your success. So when I say, what does it mean to delegate? Well, the formal dictionary definition is really it's entrusting a task or responsibility to somebody else, right? You're actually asking somebody else to do the work. And really when it's done correctly, it can grow your team's skills and their capabilities. It can absolutely increase your employee engagement and their morale. And frankly, it can help you manage your workload. And we're going to talk a lot about that this afternoon. So when it comes to delegation, it's a struggle. I mean, Larry even mentioned it early on, right? It's something that we all struggle with. And there's kind of two areas that we struggle with. It's either you need to learn to delegate more and do that more effectively, Or maybe you do delegate, but you're not very good at it, right? And it's not very effective. And so we're going to talk about figuring out, are there routine, repetitive tasks that really take up a lot of your time? Those are things that you should probably delegate. Do your employees rely on your input to make decisions and solve problems? Well, that's slowing things down. So we really need to figure out how we can delegate more to make that more effective. Maybe even dreading going on vacation because you know things are going to fall apart while you're gone. That's a sure sign that you need to delegate effectively. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when you don't delegate. Number one, planning and innovation is going to suffer. There will be no time to plan if you're doing all the work that should be done by your team. You really need to make sure that you're carving out time to be innovative and thinking about the future. You're focusing so much time on the now rather than the future that you can't think about what the future looks like because you're just trying to keep up, right? So really planning and innovation will suffer if you can't master this skill. I'd argue work-life balance will suffer, and it's probably the one that will suffer the most. Not effectively delegating directly impacts your mental health. If you're constantly feeling like everything depends on you, there's this constant stressor that's following you around, and there's really going to be no peaceful time of day, especially if you feel like you have to stay connected all the time, right? You can't shut off your cell phone because something may happen that people will need to get a hold of you for. So certainly your work-life balance will suffer. Your employees will suffer if you don't master the art of delegation, because ultimately they're not growing. They're not learning new skills. They're not learning new knowledge. They're not developing valuable problem-solving skills, especially if they have to rely on you for all the answers. And that, to that further is that they don't feel trusted. They don't feel empowered. They get frustrated by the lack of challenge because there's nothing new and different that they're doing. They're just doing the same old, same old. And ultimately, the bottom line is they're going to feel disengaged. And when an employee feels disengaged, many times they leave. Or worse, when an employee feels disengaged, they stay. And then they become an even bigger problem. So your employees will absolutely suffer if you don't really master the art of delegation. Your career will suffer. So if the other things weren't motivators, let's talk about your career. If you don't delegate effectively, you're not proving your ability to manage and lead your people. And when you're not developing future leaders, you're not going to allow your own career to grow. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, if you can't be replaced, you can't be promoted. I actually just had a client tell me that they used that line the other day in one of their coaching conversations. It's absolutely true. If you're not developing your successors, then you can't move up, right? So it's critically important that you are using delegation to develop people underneath you. And then finally, your course or your club is going to suffer if you don't figure out how to delegate effectively. Because frankly, your club will have less intellectual capital. You're not training people and teaching people. And so there's not a whole lot there to draw from. And you'll have less capable people to fill in when there's sickness or there's turnover or there's a reduction in staff that many clubs are experiencing right now. So it's really critical that you're using this time to grow your individuals and do that through delegation. So why do we struggle? I love this cartoon. I like things to be done my way, but by somebody else. Isn't that the truth, right? We want to control how things are done, but we get the fact that we need other people to do them. So, answering the question, why do we struggle with delegation? It really boils down to the fact it's all about how we're wired. So some of us, we're uncomfortable giving up the control of the process, right? It's easy to delegate the details, but not the authority or the decisions. Or maybe some of us are very process-oriented and diligent. So we may struggle with handing off key operational details. Even some of us are uncomfortable asking somebody else to do something that we know we can do ourselves. It's uncomfortable. And we don't want to push that off on somebody else, right? It's that feeling of, I can do it. It just seems silly that I'm asking somebody else to do it. Or some of us may be uncomfortable having those tough conversations when an employee ends up doing poorly on a delegated assignment, right? So if I delegate something to somebody and they don't do it right, and now I have to follow up with them and tell them they did it wrong, ooh, I don't want to do that, right? And so I'll shy away from delegation. And then finally, some of us, we just don't trust that the work's going to get done correctly. So there's a lot of reasons why we struggle with delegation, but it really boils down to the fact about how we're wired. So what do I mean by that? Well, we all have various different drives, and those drives in us create needs, and needs are what we are needing in our environment. So if I know how I'm driven, then I actually know what I need in my environment to be successful. And so there's a lot of tools out there that you can utilize to measure your drives. I utilize the predictive index. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it before, but what predictive index does is it measures a person's drives. So then you can actually predict how they're going to behave. And it also is great insight into why you don't like to delegate and maybe why you shy away from it. So I'm actually sharing my PI with you, and I know you don't know what this graph means, but I do want to point out a few things that might help you better understand what it means. You can see that I'm an operator, right? That's what my label is, if you will. And so that means that I'm a very patient, conscientious, relaxed, cooperative team worker. And so what that means for me and how I'm driven is a few things. I've highlighted this dot kind of right in the middle. And what that dot indicates on my PI is that I very much need and value accuracy and preciseness. I want things to be done the right way. And what that is code for is my way, right? I'm sure some of you can relate to that, right? I want things done the right way, and by right way, I mean my way. The other thing that my PI tells me is that I have very much a collaborative approach, and that's what that second dot on the screen tells us. And when I say collaborative approach, that's just code for I don't like conflict. I just want us all to get along. I don't want to have tough conversations. And, geez, the idea of, when you delegate and so maybe somebody doesn't complete the task just right, and now I have to confront them. I don't want to do that, right? So because I don't want to do that, I just don't delegate, and then I don't have to do that. So that's one way that how you're wired might impact your ability to delegate. I'll show you a few others here. I've removed the names to protect the innocent. But this person's what we call a promoter. And this person is absolutely driven by being flexible. And that's what that dot on the left-hand side shows you. This ability to be more flexible, kind of this go with the flow approach. And this person's not really interested in the details. So likely when this person delegates, they don't give a whole lot of detail or clarity on what they want. And that can be very frustrating to the employee that they're delegating to. They also may not follow up very much because, again, they're not interested in the details. So here, just go do it, that kind of flexible approach. The other thing that is driving this individual is where that right dot is. And that dot indicates how much social interaction this individual needs. So social interaction is sometimes code for the need to be liked, right? And so individuals with this need for social interaction may find it more difficult to correct poor performance because of this drive. So again, rather than correcting an activity that maybe hasn't been done right, this person might go behind the employee and just fix it themselves. Does that sound familiar? Sometimes that happens. And then again, here's another one, right? This individual is very much driven by accuracy and preciseness and not making any mistakes. But this person is also an individual that likes to be in control, likes to be the decision maker, and certainly not afraid to tell people what to do and follow up if things have gone wrong, right? So when you have this kind of combination of control as well as preciseness, boy, this individual actually might struggle with some micromanagement issues, right? They want to be in control, but they want it done exactly their way. So it can be very much a struggle. But the good news is that no matter what your profile is, you can actually learn to delegate effectively. And no matter how you're wired, you just need to learn to put tools in your toolbox to be better at it, no matter what your drives are. You just need to be aware of your need for control, your need to micromanage sometimes, maybe your need to be liked, or maybe your need to shy away from conflict, right? Because if you're not aware of those needs, you won't be able to effectively overcome them. and so that you can delegate effectively. Okay. So it's really all about self-awareness and really taking a good, strong look in the mirror to say, okay, why do I shy away from delegation, or why does it seem not to be effective when I do delegate? So with that, what I want to do is jump into some basics of delegation. I call them the keys to effective delegation. And so what we're going to do is we're going to focus first on how do we determine what to delegate, right? How do we decide what that is that we're going to delegate? Then secondly, we need to choose who we're going to delegate to. Third, we need to clarify the details. And then 4, we need to follow up and trust that it's going to get done. So those are really the 4 steps of effective delegation. So let's dive into the first one. So the first one is determining what to delegate, right? What tasks? So some questions you can ask yourself. Are there tasks that maybe somebody else could do better than me? I know sometimes you have to kind of swallow your pride. You're not perfect at everything. So maybe something that's on your plate right now could actually be done better by somebody else. Or maybe there are tasks that you dislike doing that maybe an employee would prefer to do, right? Think about the things in your day-to-day responsibilities that maybe it's not something that's really in your wheelhouse or you enjoy, but there might be an employee that really could learn and grow from that activity. Or maybe there are tasks that really consume a lot of your time, but they're low value, right? So think about what you make compared to maybe your staff members, right? If you're a manager, you tend to make more money than your hourly employees that work for you. And so does it make sense to spend your time on low value work at your higher pay rate? Probably not. So you need to take a look at that one. Or maybe there are tasks that really could contribute to the development of some of your employees. So is there something that could be kind of a stretch assignment that can help somebody learn and grow and really embrace engagement within your department? Or maybe there are tasks that your staff could do at a lower cost. We talked a little bit about that, but certainly something to focus on. And maybe there's tasks that could be codified for easier delegation. So what I mean by that is maybe, are there processes that you can create so that anybody could do the work? You know, I know we like to think that what we do could only be done by us, but that's not actually the case. There's a lot of ways that we can put processes in place to help people do those work and take it off of our plate. So a few things to ask yourself as you're determining what you should delegate to people. Next up, we need to figure out who we're going to delegate to, right? So first of all, who's available, right? Let's take a look at the staff. What do they have on their plate? We don't want to overwhelm. And many times when especially if you have rock stars in your department, those are initially the people that you tend to go to first. Boy, their plate's though going to get filled. So you want to make sure that you're not overwhelming somebody by providing them delegated responsibilities. You also need to know if they have the basic skill set to do the work, right? So how much is it going to take for them to be able to get started on the tasks that you're delegating to? We also want to make sure that it might be a motivator, not a demotivator, to have an assignment delegated, right? So especially if it's a stretch assignment, maybe this is something that will motivate the employee because you're giving them an opportunity to learn and grow. And then finally, the last thing I have up there is what kind of assistance is required, right? How much help and assistance is this employee going to need from you to be successful? And based on your workload, do you have the right amount of time to be able to provide the right amount of oversight? So some things to keep in mind as you're deciding who to delegate to. Now, the third part of effective delegation is clarifying the details. And I will tell you, this is the step that gets skipped the most. And this is when things fall through the cracks, right? So when delegation fails, it's because we didn't do step 3. So make sure you write this one down. So when you are delegating, we need to clearly communicate what we want. Our employees are not mind readers, okay? So make sure you're explaining the assignment. And even more critical, make sure that they understand what the end goal is, right? So what does success look like? What does that end goal look like? You also need to agree on a timeline, right? When is the expectation that this activity or assignment is going to be completed? Make sure both sides are very clear on that. And I also encourage managers to create a check-in schedule. So don't just delegate and then show up on the deadline day and say, done, right? You want to make sure that you're checking in periodically, because depending on how some of your employees are wired, they may need that to continue to stay on track. So create that check-in schedule so that deadlines don't get missed. And then finally, the fourth step is all about following up on the progress. So, just like, for example, at a hospital, they are regularly checking vital signs. You need to do the same thing with your employees. Right? So asking questions like, are we on schedule? Or can you take me through your recent work? Help me understand where you are with this project. Make sure that you're touching base and you're monitoring. So don't just delegate and disappear. You want to still be actively involved, but not too much and not too little. So we want to monitor the progress. The second thing I think is important to do is make sure that you are continually coaching. Right? So you are the coach. So you need to make sure that you're checking in regularly and course correct if needed, and make sure you're there for questions, because there may be questions that come up. You also need to answer or ask some questions. What resources do you need? Do you have everything you need? What do you need from me? Right? So you want to be aware of what your direct report needs. Sometimes if our styles are similar, then it's much more intuitive and easy to manage those individuals. But when you have a direct report that's different from you, it may not just come naturally. So you may have to adjust your management style and your leadership style to meet their needs, right? So you want to make sure that you're continually coaching. But just because you're involved doesn't mean you should micromanage. So very important that as you are delegating things and you're following up, you're avoiding micromanagement. Okay. Just keep asking yourself, does this really have to be done your way? Or are there a variety of ways that this task can be done? You always want to stay focused on the outcome, not the process, right? Now, there are certainly things that need to be done a certain way, but you want to make sure that you're focused on the outcome. What is the end goal? That's ultimately where you want to end up. I often refer to avoiding micromanagement is manage Goldilocks style. Don't follow up too much. Don't follow up too little. Follow up just right, right? So make sure that you find that sweet spot in terms of follow-up for progress. The other thing that I encourage you to be careful about is watching out for something I call reverse delegation. And that's when a direct report comes to you with a question, and rather than answering it, you just actually take back the work and you do it yourself because it's just easier. So watch out for that. That's not helping your employee develop, and it's certainly not helping your workload, right? So resist the urge to jump in and do it. Your job is to teach. So speaking of teaching, I mentioned early on that I worked in the NFL for many years, and one of the things that I think is interesting is when you hesitate to delegate, one of the things I want you to do is think about football. And I'm guessing that there's a few of you on the call that like football, that follow football, that probably can't wait for football to come back. That's the way I feel right now, right? But when you think about how football is played, I think it's a great way to think about how delegation should be working. So each person on a team has a position to play. Yes, they have physical talent, but they also need to grow. And so they train, they're coached, they're given feedback all day, every day, so that they can grow in their position. And then when it's game time, when a player is put into the game, he is delegated tasks from the coach, right? So run this route, run this play, block this guy, whatever the case may be. The coach doesn't run in to the game and hike the ball or block the defenseman or anything like that. The coach delegates the task to the player, and then the player is expected to complete the responsibilities. So all along, the coach is coaching, giving feedback, guiding, being the player that does the work. You, as the manager or the coach, you have players. You need to delegate and lead them to do the work, and that's through delegation. And it really takes what I call a mindset shift. when you think about delegation, sometimes you think about that's a requirement to be a manager. But what I would encourage you to do is actually think about delegating as teaching. Your job is a teacher, and that's through delegation. So as you're making this mindset shift, there's kind of 3 steps to be able to slowly delegate a task fully to an employee. The first one is something I call shadow, which is when you first introduce a task to somebody, you let them experience it. It's almost like a ride along, right? Let them shadow you doing it so that they can see you doing it. That's a great way for people to start learning a new task. Second, you want to give them a piece of it, right? So maybe not the whole thing yet, but give them a piece of it so that they can do it on their own with your supervision. And then when they're finally ready, let them carry the full load of the full task or responsibility. Those are really kind of the 3 key steps as you are starting to delegate tasks that might be a little bit more challenging for some of your employees. So with that, I also want to share a few resources for you. So if you are interested in continuing to learn about this and other various management topics, these are a few resources that are some of my faves. So the one on the left, the Harvard Business Review Manager's Handbook. In fact, a lot of the delegation things that we talked about today, some of them came out of this book because it's all about skills that you need to learn to stand out as a leader. And so it's a great resource. It's a very easy read. It's a great reference book. You don't have to read it cover to cover. You could literally just go to the table of contents, find the skill that you want to learn, and read that section of the book. So great book to check out. Another one is something we call Radical Candor. It's by Kim Scott. And this is a book for individuals who struggle with confronting poor performance or having tough conversations. It's a really strong book on great examples of how you can master that art. So Radical Candor is one of my favorites. A third book that I find really helpful for managers, especially as you are trying to course correct when you delegate assignments to employees. If there are employees that aren't performing at a certain level that you need them to perform at, 101 Tough Conversations to Have with Employees is a great book as well. And it's by Paul Falcone. Again, much like the Manager's Handbook I just talked about, this book of 101 Tough Conversations literally has a table of contents. You go to that table of contents, you find your problem, and then you go to that page and you read up about it. And what it does is it provides a sample scenario of likely what you're going through, but then it also provides kind of some verbiage and how you should handle the situation. Really specific in terms of what to say, how to say it, and things to watch out for. And then finally, the fourth book I think is really helpful for continued management development is a book by Marcus Buckingham and Kurt Kaufman. It's called First Break All the Rules. And it's really a great book about how great managers manage differently. And they really kind of do a fantastic job of giving you examples of how to lead your employees based on their strengths rather than trying to change their weaknesses. You know, we all have weaknesses and we can certainly try to adapt them and change them, but we can't change our weaknesses permanently. We can certainly adapt for short periods of time, but over long periods of time or under situations of stress, we're going to revert back to who we are naturally. And so it's really important that we are understanding the strengths of our team and utilizing those strengths to achieve what we're trying to achieve in our operation. So with that, I will leave you with this final quote here by John Maxwell. And, you know, ultimately, delegation is passing off things that you could do, but you shouldn't. So you do that so that you can focus on the things that only you can do as a manager. So as John says here on the screen, if you want to do a few small things right, sure, go ahead, do them yourself. But if you want to do great things and you want to make a big impact, you've got to learn to delegate. So that is your quick crash course in delegation. And hopefully that's been helpful. There's a few nuggets in there that you can take with you and apply in your daily life with your team, especially now that a lot of us might even be working remote. Although if you're out on a golf course, you're probably still out on the golf course. You're probably not working remotely, but really some really good things that you can take back and try to apply in terms of some of those keys of delegation. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Kaminsky, and if there are any questions, I can answer at this time.
Well, that was awesome. There's questions because I have questions. I was jotting down notes vigorously throughout the entire presentation. If anyone does have a question or wants to ask a question, then just put it in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen and I'll monitor it and have Jodie answer that. So first, thank you. That was great. It always makes me question whether I'm delegating properly or just dumping, right? So I put it as one of my things, like what's the difference between, true delegation for the purpose of maybe having a job that I shouldn't be doing because it's lower level and I could hire someone for $10 an hour to do it. And where does that break off come to where I'm just dumping all the things that I don't want to do onto somebody?
Right, because eventually they know you're dumping.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think at least one of my grad students is in here, and they're probably like, "Yep, he's dumping stuff on us."
Well, I think it's kind of twofold. One is understanding operational efficiency, right? So you have, I always like to start the delegation process with the idea of what are we trying to accomplish, right? What is the goal of our department, our division, our course, our, whatever organization we're a part of, what are we trying to accomplish as a team? And so then based on that goal, now, who are the players on the team and how can we best utilize those strengths to accomplish our goal? And so when we think about the delegation process, certainly it's a way for people to develop and grow as individuals, but it's also a way for us to achieve organizational efficiency so that we can achieve our goals. So I think it's finding a balance between those two things, making sure that we're utilizing the strengths of our team and developing them, but also making sure that we're being smart about what we're delegating and how we're delegating and using the financial resources from a labor perspective in the most effective way. So those are some things that, while I don't know that there's necessarily a black and white answer to it, those are some things to keep in mind as you're deciding what to delegate and how often to delegate.
Yeah, I think that what I learned, when I was a professor at UConn, I didn't delegate anything. I did everything from, everything. I had one grad student and no employees, and I just did everything. And it just was like, that's just the way it was. But now my goal is to teach and kind of mentor my students and try and train them, I think, whether it be my golf course students or my graduate students, like to try to teach them the skills so that they are able to do things more efficiently and better and progress. But the other question that I had, and can you still hear me okay?
I can. I just shut my video off because it was kind of cutting in and out. So hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully I didn't lose you. Hopefully it's okay. My other question, I'm going to find it here. So you talked about the predictive index, which I'm fascinated by. I know that Dan Mearsman at Philly Cricket, and I saw that you listed Congressional and Oakmont as people that you had worked with. How important is it to not only know your makeup for the predictive index, but also to know your employees' predictive index? Does that change the way you manage each individual person?
Absolutely. Right. So, we're all wired differently. There's no right or wrong way that we're wired. And so with that though, if we only have an understanding of who we are individually, then we will have a tendency to manage people the way that we want to be managed. But the challenge is that most of the players on your team are different than you. Right? Because if they're all the same, then that's an even bigger topic that we need to tackle. But you need a variety of behaviors and drives on your team to be successful so that there are strengths in all facets of the team. But the challenge is that because we're all different, we all have different needs in the workplace, right? So I'll give you an example, especially with this remote work environment that we're in right now. There are some people that have a really strong need for social interaction with other people. And so they really struggle with the fact that they're working home alone. And just because you have Zoom doesn't mean that that's real social interaction, right? And so they're missing that. Whereas somebody that doesn't have that drive is completely happy and content being home alone and not having to interact with people. There you go, right?
I'm fine. I can stay right here at my kitchen table. It'll be okay.
Exactly. So with that, for example, if I'm the high extroversion person, right, I'm the one that needs social interaction and you work for me, my likelihood is to pop into your office and say hello and just surprise you. Whereas if I know how you're wired, really what I should be doing is shooting you a text. How you doing today? Hey, do you have 5 minutes for me? What time is good for you? Right? Not being that social butterfly that likely after I bounce in and then bounce out of your office, you're like, oh my gosh, she just needs to stop doing that.
Yeah, when I was in a different building with all the turf faculty, I got moved to a different building, but I would go into somebody's office and spend an hour. You don't even realize it, just chatting. And then as I'm about to leave, somebody else would come in and then we'd spend another hour. And then later the person's office I went into was like, I can't get anything done because all you guys do is come in my office.
Yep.
Somebody asked, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so the more you understand how your people are wired, the more you can modify your leadership style to meet their needs. And when you meet their needs, they're going to be more effective and more productive and more engaged. So ultimately that's the end goal. So we as leaders have to modify our leadership styles to really meet the needs of our employees to get the most out of them.
Yeah, I think that's, well, I mean, your training is essential because it's a hard skill to learn. So there's a question and it says, if a person does not seem to be able to delegate, what are the alternative job opportunities in the golf industry? Are there clear delineations between jobs that require delegation? They said, it seems like every job requires some sort of delegation. Have you seen people, you know, that just can't get it? Are there any things that they maybe go into that they still find success?
Well, I think there's a couple different things that you can look at. So one, when you think about delegation, the reason you have to delegate is because you probably have a larger staff, a larger operation to run. So if you really are drawn to doing work rather than leading people to do work, right? What I talked about at the very beginning. One of the things to think about is looking at courses or companies and opportunities that are a smaller operation. So you do still do a lot of the work and yet lead maybe a smaller group of individuals rather than a larger group of 30, 40, 50 people. So many times when especially in the turf industry, one of the things that I've noticed with, you know, obviously my husband is a former golf course superintendent. I know a lot of golf course superintendents. I've worked and done a lot of education in this industry. And one of the things that I see quite frequently on the PI side, the predictive index side, is that many of you are really wired on the science side, right? You're driven by data and analytics and very much thinking and those sorts of things. And so those are things that can be very helpful when you're looking at what type of operation to work in. So if that's what's driving you is that side of the coin, then finding a smaller operation to run doesn't mean you can't be a golf course superintendent, but you want to find a smaller operation to run so that you can really still get your hands in and do the work because that's what's driving you. And then a smaller portion of your job will actually be leading and managing people. So that's one way to look at it, but there's also other things. So for example, if delegation isn't your thing, there's a lot of other industries that are connected to the golf industry, right? Sales. So if you are a salesperson for, I don't know, one of the big companies that's selling supplies, I won't throw out any particular names, but if you're selling, then you're not necessarily having to manage a group of people and delegate assignments. You're managing your own book of business and doing things such as that. So there are definitely other areas of the industry that you can still stay connected with. Those are just a few that I'd throw out there, things to think about. Hopefully that kind of answers the question.
It does. It makes me think a lot of my students as well, because I get a lot of this, I love the smell of fresh cut grass and I mow the straightest lines. And I'm like, you know, you're not going to be doing any of that stuff if you're successful in this industry. You're going to be thankful there one day that you get to go out and mow grass. But the idea of them being aware that as they progress, they do less of the work and then more of the delegation. Because I'll hear people say, oh, well, that director of golf or grounds at the golf course, they don't do anything, right? Like we never see them. They don't do anything.
Right.
And I'm like, well, don't you want to be in that position someday? Is that like something you aspire to? And if not, we talk about things like you mentioned, like maybe you want to go to a smaller club where you're a working superintendent, or maybe you want to go to a multi 18-hole facility where you're delegating a lot of people, but you're in meetings and, you know, conferences and stuff more so than anything else.
Right. Well, and how you're wired really drives that, right? So a smaller facility where you can do a lot of repetitive tasks. There's individuals, for me, for example, my PI, I like routine, I like familiar, I like repetitive tasks, right? My husband, not so much. He's completely different. He's strategy, he's big picture. He's like, give me a problem, let me solve it, right? When things get too routine for him, he's like, okay, what's next? I'm anxious. I want to get going on the next problem. And so that's where, when you know that about yourself, you now can put yourself in situations where you're going to be successful and have enough challenge and have enough growth to be able to feed that need for new and different. Yeah. So absolutely. You know, and another thing that I quite often will talk to my clients about, you know, I work in the hospitality industry and private clubs, and I'll be working with some hospitality students, and, you know, I talked with one time, and he said, I want to be an executive chef. Well, tell me why you want to be an executive chef. Oh, I love to cook. I just love creating new and different. And I hated to burst the bubble, but you know what? How often does an executive chef actually get to cook? Not very often, right?
No,
they're strategizing. Yeah, right. They're strategizing. They're hiring. They're creating. You know, doing budgets and things like that. And it's a lot less cooking and a lot more business management. And so, understanding what it is that's really driving your career growth will be very helpful in putting you in positions where you don't get frustrated and burnt out.
I've got a question. Where does communication skills fit into the PI schema of assessment?
I'm losing you. I can't hear you.
Well, what am I going to say? Everything froze up.
Is it me that froze up? Can anybody hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
It could have been me on the recording. Can you hear Larry?
I can hear Larry.
Okay. The question was, where does communication skills fall into the PI schema, or is that sort of an independent sort of a capability?
Well, communication skills, what the PI will tell you is how you prefer to communicate and where your strengths will be from a communication perspective.
Okay.
So if, you know, for example, you know, I was talking about on my PI, I'm very much detailed, precise, accurate. And so when I communicate, I'm going to be very detailed in the amount that I communicate, sometimes too much, if you ask my husband. I give him too much detail. He's like, nope, just need the big picture overview. I don't need all the detail. Well, because of how I'm wired, I want detail, so I give a lot of detail. And so I'm aware of that, and I'm very aware of, you know, the individuals that I'm working with to make sure that I'm communicating with them the way they needed to be communicated with. Right. Same with in-person communication versus email communication. You know, because I know how I'm wired, I love to pick up the phone and call people, but I have clients that don't want me to do that because of how they're wired. They just want an email. So I make sure that for those clients, I communicate with them in the manner in which they prefer based on how they're wired. So when it comes to communication, that's certainly, you know, it can be very helpful. And especially when you talk about golf course superintendents and all the different people they have to communicate with, right? Their membership, their boards, their staff. Many times they'll get themselves in trouble because they're not communicating enough. A lot of times it's because they tend to be maybe more introverted, and they're not wanting to necessarily step out of their comfort zone and be proactive in the communication process. So having an understanding of how you're wired will help you better understand, okay, this is why I do what I do, but my job requires me to do it this way. So I've got to learn some tools to put in my toolbox to be successful at that, so I can be successful at my job. So
do you train people to sort of like target their communications, like sort of doing like what the PI of like a green committee, not an individual, but like a green committee you would assume they're this sort of a listening group, or as you're talking to your staff as a group, is there a way to help communicate based on that PI when you're sort of looking at the receiving end?
Absolutely.
Of the communication?
And in fact, several of my club clients actually have their boards do their PIs. Well, you think about, if you know how your greens committee chair wants you to communicate with him, how much easier life will be, right? Because
Yeah.
you're not sharing too much or too little. You're not sharing too often or not enough, too much detail, all of those sorts of things. So when I know how somebody's wired, now I can tailor my communication style to meet what they need, which is going to keep them listening to me. Because if I'm communicating in a way that isn't pleasing to them, they're going to shut off and they're not listening to me anymore. And I need them to listen to me. So absolutely, whether it's individual or as a whole, it can be very, very insightful to understand, what the behaviors are and how people are wired on the committee so that you can share the right amount of information.
There's no way to sort of get it like a general sort of like an idea, like green committees, you communicated this sort of.
Not really, because every committee is different, right? So, every 1 to 2 years, you get a new committee chair, and that person is into the details. The last guy really couldn't care less about the details. And so, it's very much different based on each person's style. And, when in lieu of having a predictive index to understand what those styles are, the really the right thing to do is start asking the questions, right? How often do you want me to communicate? How much detail do you want me to go into? Taking those cues so that you can communicate in the right amount for your Greens committee.
Jodie, I had a question. Can I? Mm-hmm. I might be unstable. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
Yeah, I put the camera off because I think it's like unstable, the internet. I had a question. In your dealing with the golf industry, the turf industry, is there one kind of model of the PI that is usually associated with what we would consider to be successful superintendents? Is there?
No, because it really depends on the size of club, the size of the operation, how many people you have to manage, how much change is happening. So at a club that doesn't want anything changed and renovated and it's very steady, stable, consistent, that's going to be kind of one kind of perfect profile. But at a club that's constantly changing and renovating and doing all sorts of things that way, that's going to look a little bit different. So there's not just one style that will work. The other thing that I think is important to understand is we're all wired differently, right? So the first step is for us to understand how we're wired and what drives us and what we need in our environment. But then the second step is understanding what the job requires. And we can all adapt our styles if we're willing to see that we need to adapt our styles, right?
That's
so
hard.
Many times managers, no matter what industry, they get in trouble because they go in and they say my way or the highway. No, it's not going to work. Right? So understanding the environment you're in and understanding what the expectations are of your general manager or your club president, and making sure that you're modifying and adapting how you're wired to fit the needs of that job. The one caveat to that is that if all day, every day, you're changing who you are to be successful in your job, it's not sustainable. You're going to burn out and you're going to quit, or you're going to burn out, you're going to stay, and you're going to hate your job. Because you can't be who you naturally are. We can all change and adapt a little bit here, a little bit there, but when we have to change and adapt all day, every day, it's just not sustainable, and that's when burnout occurs. So that's why it's really important, especially as you're looking at your next job opportunities or even in your current job. What is it that I love about my job, and what is it that just exhausts me about my job? And when we're exhausted, many times it's because we're having to change who we are to be successful in that part of our job.
How early in a career can someone get a good handle on their PI?
We usually say that you don't want to kind of start to dig into that until you've reached kind of the years of 18 or older, because you're still kind of growing and changing. And when we're talking about taking a predictive index, and assessments are different depending on which assessment you use, but PI is verbal based. So you have to have a good understanding of the words on the assessment. And you don't want it to, if you don't understand the words, then you will maybe check or not check boxes that may not be accurate. In fact, PI also provides their assessments in over 80 languages because you want to take it in your native language.
Oh,
we lost her. She's pretty good about getting in quickly though. So
okay.
All of a sudden you disappeared. Am I talking to myself?
No, you were talking. The last thing you said was that it was important to take it in your native language.
Yes. Okay. So usually though, it's once somebody kind of reaches adulthood, that's really a good time to start doing that. I do have some clients who've given it to their kids because it can be very insightful. Like, why is my kid doing this? Oh, now I know why. It's how they're wired. It can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, that all sounds, that's awesome. I mean, it's as important as soil type, I think, what you're talking about. but it's a moving target, so it seems even more challenging than of course it's more challenging. The agronomic stuff is simple. Everybody knows that. Growing grass is not a problem.
If only our job was to grow grass. That'd be so easy.
Yeah, right. That is not the issue for being well, it's not a turf grass manager. It's
right.
That's sort of a misnomer also.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're not managing turf grass. You're managing a sophisticated operation with many moving parts and personalities.
Right. Well, and even when we think about, selecting talent to work out on the course, right? I mean, the person that's cutting the cups is likely wired differently than the person raking the bunkers. Yeah. So, because you need a different level of preciseness and accuracy, you need a different level, certainly of knowledge, skills, and experience. But when you're thinking about the jobs where people are working on teams, the bunker team versus somebody that's on a mower alone all day, that's completely different. And so if you put somebody that's, high extroversion that needs social interaction to work alone for 8 hours on a mower, the first time they see a member, they're going to want to jump off the mower and go talk to a member. Right? That's not very productive, right? So that person should be on a team where they can interact with people, and the people that don't need to be on a team, those are the individuals that should be on the equipment. The other thing that we use PI for is actually safety. So you can actually predict individuals based on how they're wired, whether they're going to follow safety rules, if they're going to, follow the checklist of, lockout, tag out, or, whatever the case may be, or if they're going to take a risk because they're a risk taker and, I don't know, stick your arm in a fan, while it's still plugged in. I don't know. So there's different ways that you can use this type of data to lower workers' comp costs, increase engagement. There's just so many different ways you can use it, much like all the other data that drives what you do out on the course. I mean, the turf grass is one of the industries that uses data the most when it comes to managing how the product is doing out on the course. So same thing with your employees.
Awesome.
Well, what would the next step if somebody wanted to pursue in more detail, other than the 4 books that you listed there?
Sure.
Getting an assessment.
Well, on my website, optimustalentpartners.com, you can actually take your own PI, or I don't have it up on the screen here. I don't even know if this is still showing, but let me see if I can put I realized on the end, the last slide doesn't have my
You can reshare your screen if you want. I took it down so we could see you more, but if you want to share that screen and put it back up, you can do that.
Gotcha. Hold on. Now I got to get to that. Share screen. Okay. Is it back up now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So bottom left-hand corner. So I have either on Twitter, certainly I'm on Twitter. So if you want to send me a direct message, or my cell phone number is on there as well, or optimustalentpartners.com. You can take your own PI and then I'll send you the report and we can go over it so you can kind of see how the PI works, but then also all of the management resources that go along with it. Once you have somebody's data and their report, it's kind of cool to read. Wow. Oh my gosh, it's so accurate. But now what? Like, what do I do with it? Yeah. PI is great about saying, okay, so when you're coaching and managing and leading this person, here's what you should delegate to them. Here's how you should provide feedback. They do a really good job of giving managers resources that are quick and easy to use day to day with their teams. So.
Well, John's turf chats are so popular, you're going to be swamped with requests.
She's like, sorry, can't look at all your stuff. I know that I've been meaning to go on and take it, and I just haven't gotten around to it. But I think we'll talk about that. Larry, I was telling Jodie I would love to get her up to speak to my graduating seniors and maybe even do like the PI effective index on them and talk about it. We do it a little bit with the Myers-Briggs, but I think it would be cool. And I think there's more superintendents that are out there using the PI than any of the other indexes. So it would be good.
Yeah,
well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's just quick. That's one of the nice things about it is it's quick. You can use it in the hiring process, and it's easy for managers to use. So that's the things I enjoy about it.
Well, awesome. This was great. Maybe we'll have to find some superintendents that use it and then get you back in here and have more of a discussion.
Yes.
About specifically the predictive index, because I've been fascinated with it since I talked to Dan Mearsman about it. I just have never gotten into it. And I told you I took it at Augusta, and then they never gave me my results.
Right. Right. Well, you know, actually, when I don't know if you know Carlos Arrea at Belle Reve Country Club, but they hosted the 100th PGA Championship, and all the volunteers that volunteered to work on his cruise took PIs, and he did that because he wanted to put them on teams so that they would be effective with one another. So it was a way for him to pair people up and team people up based on how they're wired so that they would, you know, you don't have time to really figure each other out when you are just coming in and helping with the tournament and leaving. And so that was his way of really putting together some really strong teams, and it went really well. But he did give them copies of their PI.
Did they just send you home, John? They got your PI and just send you home? He's frozen. He's frozen, John.
Oh, now he's back.
Can you hear me? And I see everybody just kind of like frozen. With that, I'm gonna end it because I want to make sure that I have the ability to end the recording. But thanks for everybody that came in. Jodie, thank you for sharing all the information, and Larry for co-hosting this. But I will have this up on YouTube, so we'll be able to watch it. You know, and get the great knowledge, even if you weren't able to make it in here. I'll give a plug, Larry, for our upcoming episode, which is next Thursday with you and Mike Huck. And we're going to be talking about recycled water.
We'll have Jeff Beardsley will be there also.
Yeah. Where is he currently? I know that
he was at Big Canyon Country Club. He is now a free agent for a bit of time.
Okay. So we're going to be talking about recycled water and its impact on various aspects of golf course management. So we'll get back to the agronomy stuff, but we got to keep having these.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah, these right. These communication though, and the HR and the business ones, I think are really good to interject. So thanks again, and with that, I'm going to end the recording. Thanks, everybody.